Why are there so many programming languages? And given that there are so many, how come people are still creating more of them? I mean, it's a lot of work, right? It's a heck of a lot of work to do something we seem to have plenty of. Why bother? I think there are a few really compelling reasons. Some people do it for research. They have an idea of how programming could look in the future, how it could be, and they want to take that idea for a walk, put it through its paces, explore it further. Other people create a new language because they're cherry picking. They look out into the world and say, well, I like Python's programming model, but I want C's syntax and some of Go's concurrency features. So I'm going to put them together in something new. A bit like recipe making, they're baking their own cake. And other people build a language because there's a hole in the market. Like JavaScript is the famous example. It exists because browsers needed a programming language, so someone had to create one. And that's actually my favourite thing about JavaScript. It took you to somewhere you couldn't have gone without it. But all these motivations come together in the creation of a relatively new programming language called Gleam. You might not have heard of Gleam, but stick around because you're about to. I'll give you one metric. If GitHub stars are anything to measure by, it is apparently more popular than F#. So let's find out why. I'm joined today by the very charming Louis Pilfold, who's the creator of the Gleam programming language. And he's going to tell us why he thought the world needed a new language, how he survived for the multi-year crazy journey it takes to go from idea to production, and what Gleam has to offer us as programmers. We're all out there trying to get a job done. Can Gleam help us do it better, faster, easier, cheaper, more fun? Any of those? Some of the above? Well, let's find out. Let's get cracking. I'm your host, Chris Jenkins. This is Developer Voices, and today's voice is Louis Pilfold. I'm joined today by Louis Pilfold. Louis, how you doing, man?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Yeah, it's good to see you. We haven't met in person since before the pandemic.
Oh, since before the event, yes.
The event. The event that shall not be named.
Yeah, I keep having to bump into you, but yeah, just digital will do for now.
They'll have to, even though London's not that large. But
no,
yeah, I'll do it online.
I feel like with the same city and similar interests, we would have bumped into each other at a tech or something with lots of people making bleeps and bloops with synthesizers and stuff. But no, nothing yet.
Yeah. Sooner or later, we'll cross paths again. But for now, I have been keeping tabs on you in my secret tracking cave.
Ominous.
You've been busy writing a whole programming language.
I have. It's sort of started as a pet project and grew wildly out of control, and is now dangerously useful, which is quite nice.
See, that's something I want to get into, but first we should probably set the frame. And what is your language? Is called Gleam, right?
Yes.
What is it? Why do we need a new language?
Well, so I think it really comes from me being always a little bit. So I'm a person who loves languages, which I think you are as well. So I always try and I used to try and learn a new one, or two or three, like every year or so. And I reached this point where I was just annoyed with every language, because when I was writing Elm, I wished I was writing Haskell. When I was writing Haskell, I wish I was writing Erlang. When I was writing Erlang, I wish I was writing Rust. It's like, I wish I had that bit from there and that bit from there. This would be really easy if I had that. And so, I ended up sort of like saying, well, what happens if I try to like draw all of the best bits? Could I make something that was like cohesive and really nice? Or would it just be, the horrible mash of bells and whistles and nothing quite fitting together?
See, I know a few languages that have asked that question, and their answer has been a horrible mash.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about your answer?
Good. So I think it's tricky. I took a lot of inspiration from Lua and Go, and that, as a functional program, don't let that put you off. I don't mean in the like it's a very simple procedural language, but like I try to make the surface area of the language very small and try to make it very consistent. Or hopefully more so than Go, I think. And yeah, it's just sort of like what are the really valuable things from these different types of languages, which I think are really interesting. And then how can we take the smallest amount of all of them and make it as consistent as possible? which I think is not the way a lot of people go for languages. It seems to be like adding more, but I'm trying to like have less. And yeah, a bunch of years in, it seems like it's really resonating with a lot of people. So that's quite nice. I'm pretty happy with that.
That's very cool. Okay, so tell us what your what you've picked from the buffet car of languages.
So it is a simple functional language in sort of in the style of Elm, perhaps. I think you're an Elm fan from the past.
I'm an Elm fan, yeah.
So there's the language got quite a small number of features, and we generally say like, well, you've got functions, and they take in values, and they return values, and you kind of ignore everything else. That's sort of all you need. But rather than having like an Elm syntax, although we did originally have a syntax like that, we've got a syntax that's much more familiar to JavaScript programmers or C programmers. Lots of curly braces and all that stuff. And I originally thought, oh, what's the point of that? It's just syntax, doesn't matter. And then we switched syntax, and suddenly everyone was like, oh, this language is great now. It's like, nothing's changed. So I was wrong. Syntax really does matter. And I sort of missed the old one, but the new one people really like. So, and the thing that is, I think, one of the big sells of it is that it runs on the Erlang virtual machine, which is called the Beam, which is unusual for a virtual machine, that is designed for functional languages from the get-go. And rather than being like a research project, like a lot of functional things are, it was built for industry. It was built for telephone switches, Ericsson. So it's got it's really built with running and maintaining and debugging, really reliable systems.
Ah, that's interesting. So the main thing I know about the Beam, other than it's not Apache Beam, it's Erlang Beam.
Yes.
Is it's famed for its novel approach to reliability.
Yes. So like, we're trying to do both in Gleam. There's all these arguments between the typing people and the Erlang people about how you should deal with errors. Like, you should make it impossible in the Elm world. Make invalid states unrepresentable in your program, which is actually really fantastic technique to do that. But all the Erlang people are like, no, that's rubbish, because like, how do you make memory corruption impossible in your application? What happens if what if you've got a cluster of computers and one of them gets struck by a bolt of lightning because it's up a telephone pole doing running telephone switch firmware? Oh yeah, you can't really do that with types, can you? So the whole thing is about failure's going to happen. You just have to lean into that. Your entire system needs to be able to explode in some dramatic way, and you should be able to survive that. And it sort of boils down to the sort of, IT crowd, have you tried turning it off and on type thing? And breaking your system into loads of tiny little bulkheads where like, oh, an error's gone wrong in this subsystem. Okay, let's restart that. Did that fix it? No? Okay, well, let's go one step bigger. What if we reset? What if we discard the corrupted state in that system and then just like slowly, incrementally drop things out? So you can kind of see parallels between the Beam and maybe Kubernetes or something. So if you've got a pod, a deployment of a web service that's running Go or something, and something goes wrong in it, well, the instance goes down, and then Kubernetes brings it back up again, and then it should be a good state. And you've lost those jobs that are in progress, but then it should be okay. That's really cool, but kind of rubbish in that like that single instance of a Go program is probably running hundreds or maybe thousands of jobs at the same time. So losing the whole thing sucks. So like imagine if at that you could have that whole pattern, but rather than at like a sort of data center level, you could have it inside your program level, where your single VM instance is really running hundreds, thousands, millions of threads, and you can do that incremental state shedding at the individual thread level.
So maybe you just lose like one web request, something like that.
Yeah, the idea is, I mean, you can sort of do this sort of thing like try catch in other languages, but it's sort of a much more. It's taking the idea of like we'll catch it and we deal with it, but in a much more how do I describe it? In a much more fine-grained and sort of sophisticated way than you would do in other languages. And it just results in, it results in extremely reliable services. Like there's companies that claim 9 nines of reliability with Erlang, which I'm not sure I've ever seen proof of that. But the fact that they can claim it and people go, oh, maybe, I think that says a lot about how good this thing is. And it also means you can do things
it on the radar to look at, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like the fact that it's plausible implies that, this is really, extremely good. And it means you can do things like offensive programming quite happily. So like, I'm just never going to check any of the errors. I'm just going to insist that everything succeeds. And if it fails, well, I don't need to write any error handling logic in my business logic. That can be dealt with out there in the ether with non-local error handling, as they might call it.
I've always wondered, does that just result in systems that are constantly trying and crashing and trying and crashing in an infinite loop of let it crash?
Yes. But,
okay.
Sort of. Like there's a company called, I don't know how to pronounce their name. That's embarrassing. But they're the people who run PureScript on the Erlang virtual machine, and they do video streaming. And they said they had a bug where the system would crash every 100 frames or something like that. And they didn't notice for 8 months because it just ran so well. Like they didn't notice any problems in the area. It would run for 100 frames, crash, system would restart that tiny little subsystem, and then it would continue.
Oh, so it was picking up after every 100th frame, and they got the
it's
video.
just like, we'll just retry that frame, and it carries on. And they just didn't know. And I was like, maybe they should improve their, monitoring. But the fact that so if we think about running systems in production, we want it to continue working for our users, but you also not to want to have a really stressful time when it does go wrong. So, when things do start crashing, you do want to know about it, and there's lots of mechanisms for that, and you do want to be able to debug it, and there's lots of mechanisms for that. But mainly, you don't want to be woken up at 3 a.m. with people screaming down the phone saying you've got to fix it. You want to be able to do it in like the most low stress way possible, right? So it's all about it holding itself together just well enough for you to deal with whatever the problem is.
Right, because that kind of monitoring, debugging, and failure handling baked in from the start in industry, I think, really appeals.
Yeah.
And I've often, for the sake of the platform, the Beam, I have gone towards Erlang for a look. And Erlang's really weird.
Yeah.
And I say that as a Lisp Haskell programmer. Erlang's weird, right? It's weird. And it's put me off every time.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem. So the Erlang runtime's got these amazing properties because they come from real world requirements. We want to make sure that a greedy green thread can never block the scheduler and cause any problems for anything else. So you can have a hot loop and everything continues running. That's fine. And we want it to, if someone sends us a bad regex, we don't want it to block the scheduler. If something crashes, we don't want it to bring down the system. All these things, they've got that all down. Amazing. But the actual language, I mean, I love Erlang. I'm just going to say it first, but it looks dreadful. It looks so bad. And it's really awkward in a lot of ways. And the tooling is strange.
I was refreshing myself earlier and I had a look and I'd forgotten about this, but to export a function out of a module, you have to export function name / the number of arguments it takes.
Because
start /1.
Yeah, because
weird.
Functions are they're not just a unique name. It's unique based upon not just the name, but also the number of arguments. So you could have main 0, main 1, main 2, main 3. Those are all separate functions.
It feels like something a computer could take care of for us, though.
Yeah, but it's true, and we do that. But at least Gleam does do that. But if you have that control, you can actually do different things. You can actually, it's actually more powerful. You can actually decide if you want to reference the 1 or the 2 or the 3. Is that, I don't know, you just end up with, in Erlang, they do use it a lot. It's these sort of things whatever tools you're given and you're used to, you will find uses for. And even though I as a person who likes, Rust and Elm and things like that, I might look and go, I'm not sure I like that feature very much. All the Erlang and Elixir people complain constantly that they don't have this when they're trying Gleam. So you're sort of damned either way, really. And with one of the goals of Gleam is to make all these wonderful things you get in the Erlang world, make them much less alien seeming to the rest of us. So people, because there's only so much strangeness you can tolerate. Like if someone is like mildly interested in Erlang because they've heard these really cool things about this like super concurrent fault tolerant runtime, and they're suddenly met with Erlang, they might go, "This is just weird. This is too much. The weirdness is greater than my curiosity. I'm going to go somewhere else."
Yeah.
So I want something that looks a lot more normal, and even if that is worse in some ways, if we can get more people, that'd be better. And it'd be better in other ways, It's always a trade-off.
Yeah, yeah. Let's use the word accessibility because that makes it sound really good.
Okay, not weirdness, accessibility.
Not weirdness. Yeah.
I did once ask the creator of it was after a conference, and I had a couple of beers, so I was feeling a bit brave, and I asked the creator of Erlang, why does it look like that? And he said, "Oh, you should have seen it before we open sourced it. It looked much worse."
Awesome. I can only imagine. That's Joe Armstrong, right?
I was asking Verding, but yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, did you explicitly, when you're going around picking up your favorite bits of languages, was it always the case that you wanted to compete with, replace, offer an alternative to Erlang, but be on the Beam?
I've been a Beam user for a long time. Both I got it through Elixir, and I quite quickly ended up writing Erlang as well. I quite enjoyed both languages, and it being a runtime that isn't used very much, and I love a lot. It just seemed like quite an obvious choice to use this. And even before I was starting to think about like how could this be useful to people? It's like I really like this runtime. I really want to use it in my my ideal pet programming language that no one's ever going to use. They seem like the right way to go. But even if I was designing it to be like this is for people. Which I do now, but like from the very beginning, I think I would have made the same decision. But I don't see it as being competing so much because I think the people who are going to come to Erlang and the people who are going to come to Gleam are two different sets of people. There's lots of people who have an interest in the runtime, but will say this thing has like a weird prologue mishmash syntax, and it is dynamically typed, and it has loads of sort of unusual, not quite prologue, not quite this, not quite that, patterns and stuff in it. That's probably not for me. I'll go write Scala or something else. And there's lots of people who go, oh, it's got this weird Ruby syntax. I'm not sure about this Elixir thing. It's all these weird Lisp macros. That's not me. I won't use it either. Well, the people who don't like those two things may like the idea of a C-looking, small, functional language that has a sort of an Elm style type system, So I don't think we're going to draw so many people from the Erlang and Elixir world. I think it's going to be much more. We're going to bring people to the Beam community as a whole, really. So I'm hoping we'll work together. And a lot of Gleam as a language is built around the idea of like interop between Gleam and the other languages as well. So hopefully people write things in it. Well, people can write things in Erlang and Elixir and we can use them, but hopefully it's also the other way around. We make it really easy to write things in Gleam, and then that will be able to use by the Erlang and Elixir folks as well.
Okay, so that's often overlooked, that kind of two-way interop.
Yes,
like you can both consume and provide. Right?
Yeah. The tooling's a bit isn't quite as good there as I would like it to be because it depends upon the Erlang and Elixir people building a bit of tooling, but there's ways that they can do it. I think there's there's loads of value in it because we're not. I don't want to compete with Erlang Elixir because I'll lose. And also, why would I want to compete with my closest neighbors? I want to be working together. And I wish more languages thought about it. Like Erlang being sort of the universal language of the platform, it's quite easy to work in both directions. But Elixir is very much designed to be able to use Erlang code, but it's trickier in a lot of ways to use it from Erlang. And there's certain features you just can't use. That's just the trade-off they've made.
Fair enough. Well, an interop future, we'll get there eventually, universal computing. But take me through so I know a few programmers who've done this, have written like a hobby programming language. It's kind of one of those rites of passage once you've been programming for long enough. And I realized two things from doing that. The first is that a programming language isn't magic, right? Mm-hmm. Writing a program that evaluates source code is actually really interesting and not that hard. Mm-hmm. But the journey from that hobby project to something you can actually put in production is huge.
Yeah.
Take me through your journey on that.
I think it's just stubbornness on my part, really. I sort of explain it to people who don't understand tech as being like a chap who's built a model railway in his garage, but it's like a very, very large, ornate one with multiple layers and realistic representation of town. Like, it's just, you look at it and you go, why have you done this? It's very impressive, but like, that was clearly a lot of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just curiosity, because I love languages, and there's just so many bits you can dig into. And so that kept me interested and busy for a few years, well, maybe the first 2 or so. But I was quite lucky in that I was already fairly well known in the Erlang and Elixir world, because I got onto Elixir quite early, and I'd done a thing of, oh, well, Elixir doesn't have this thing that I used to use in Ruby or Elm or something. I really wish I had that. Maybe I'll try and make one. So I made a linter, which was forked and is now the main linter in the Elixir ecosystem, which is great because I don't have to maintain it.
Yeah.
And I wrote...
build it, open source it, push it out the door.
Exactly, yeah. It's much better than the one I wrote, but it was mine originally. And I wrote a formatter because I thought Elm format was amazing. And so that then inspired an official one. So just from these things, I was sort of known a little bit. And then when I started doing this language thing and I put lots of like fashionable words on it, like types, people were like, oh, that's interesting. And it's sort of like people started chatting a bit, because I'm always insistent on developing in the open. So even though I wasn't really publicizing it, people would look at it and say, oh, look, this thing here. And then that gave me a lot more, when people show interest in your work, it gives you a lot more, gives you encouragement. You want to keep working on it. And then I slowly got this idea like, oh, actually, maybe this, I actually quite like all the ideas I've come to here after, a couple of years of working on it. Maybe this could be useful for something. And now we're in a place where people are using it, which is wild.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You must have there are a large number of pieces you must have put together along the way, though, right? Because just adding a type system to a platform that's never had a typed language, that's a whole chunk of knowledge and research.
Yeah, that was quite painful. Like, I knew I was always a lover of well-typed languages, but never knew how they worked, So all the things in... I think part of the reason why Gleam is doing well is that I'm not a very academic person when it comes to like the theory of the implementing these things. I would describe myself more as like a language designer than I am a language compiler implementer or a runtime implementer, which is a shame because I think those are really fascinating things. But all my learning has been, I want specifically X. I've spent a lot of time like experimenting with different language designs. Like, what if the language had this feature? And then I would like write loads of code as if it had that feature, and then just like compile it in my head and go, what would that do? How would that work? How could I write these programs? And I'd go through that loop over and over again and go, right, I want this. Now, how does that? I know people can do this. How do I do it? And then I'd have to like find a suitable amount of understandable papers and stuff to try and work out. And it was misery, but. I sort of know a bit about some type systems now, so that's good. Like enough to make a useful one.
Could you pass the exam now?
I'm sure I couldn't.
It's not loaded into short-term memory.
I'm very good at anything that Gleam has inside it, and anything it doesn't, I don't know. And it's frustrating a bit because you get to a point where like you understand it well enough, and that's because you've successfully implemented whatever that feature is. And I'd really like to continue learning it, but I actually need to do this other unrelated thing for the language. Because Gleam's quite... one thing Gleam does, which I think is quite clever, and I think more languages should do, is that like everything is... all the bits that you commonly touch are considered part of like the core language. Not core the language, but like the core project. So we don't just have like a language and a compiler. We've also got a build tool and package manager and... language server and all these sorts of things, and like a package index, so we, rather than leaving those things up to the community, like that'll be baked in, and that's resulting in like a really good experience. But it just means I've learned something interesting about type systems, and I have to go work on like dependency resolution algorithms instead, and I never actually get good at any of them.
How on earth do you stay on top of all of that? Because each one of those could be a project in itself, right? Just
Hmm.
building a package manager from scratch and making it good. There are
Well,
teams of people that do that.
yeah, so with package management, luckily we're forced to cheat a little bit in that we want to interop really well with the rest of the Beam language, so we use their package manager. So
Okay.
the side of uploading and distributing, well, all the server side stuff, somebody's already built that. We just have to use their API. Bit confusing because no one's really, I think, as far as I can tell, 2 people have integrated ever with that API, so the docs are not amazing. 3 now. So by the
Three.
time, I worked out that, I only need to do the client side, but that's still really complicated. Like the algorithms for how you, work out which versions to use with a bunch of constraints is quite challenging. But yeah, a lot of it is just working out what is it's the whole startup thing, right? What is the MVP of each thing? What is the smallest useful approach? And having a language that is designed to be small, because I think that is a better experience as a user, actually makes it a lot easier to implement as well. If I was trying to make a Rust or a Scala, it would never be possible, would it? But I'm trying to make a Lua or a Go, so.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I can hear your cat in the background.
Happy little guy.
So, do you think? Because I've followed a bit about your design process, and you say you're doing like fantasy programming design, right? I also know you've done things like gone off to Twitter and said, "Hey, what syntax would you expect for this behavior?" and stuff. And you've run
Yeah.
regular Twitter polls on design, and you're keeping the language small, and that allows you to make certain design choices. What's been important about making a cohesive language? Some languages do that well, some do it badly. How do you approach that?
So all the polls and stuff's really useful because I want to make things not what's the word we said, accessible,
Yeah,
not
principle of
weird.
least surprise.
Yeah, and I just find that I'm often wrong just about what is normal and what isn't. I think it's easy to assume that your opinion is the standard one, but it just isn't. So it's really useful to just every now and again sort of sense check and say, like, which of these 2 things looks, try not to ask it directly, like which 2 things looks least weird, but like sort of ask them simple questions about some example code and just see which ones people get confused by. Because even if I think something else is a better idea, I'm probably wrong. But it's quite tricky. Just like you just spend, I think just doing things really slowly really helps. I think that's another reason why having something that's small where I'm doing the majority of the work really helps because I get to spend an awful lot of time because I'll be working on a package manager or something, and I will have had an idea for something 6 months before I even started that, but I'm still working on this for 6 months. So I've got like a year of I'm having breakfast staring out the window. I'm like, oh, what if it did this thing? How would that impact this thing? Sort of like gently brewing ideas in the back of your head. And after like 12 months of thinking about these things, you'll have enough moments where something went, oh, but that would interact with this thing. Oh, that's interesting. What about that? And you normally end up sort of accidentally covering all of it just by, well, I guess obsessively thinking about it for an extreme amount of time. Slow programming. That's my
Slow
recommendation.
but obsessive.
Yeah.
Never stop thinking, but spend a long time. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because I know I'm going to try not to name names, but there are some languages that look like the author has woken up in the morning with a new feature idea, thrown it together as fast as possible, and shipped it out the door.
Yeah.
And then there are some that feel more cohesive, right?
Yeah, and I want to do that. It feels great to like have an idea, throw it together, and chip it. Like
Yeah.
I dream of finishing Gleam, and handing it over to some Gleam foundation that can do things, and then I can just make the language that's all the bad ideas that I didn't do along the way. Because they're always like the medium bad ideas are where they're bad, and you go, yeah, that's not clever. Let's not do that. But the really bad ideas are the ones where you go, ooh. Oh, that sounds really good. Let's do that.
Do you have an example?
I don't know. I'm not sure. It's always like whatever sounds fancy as possible. So like one that is dangerously good sounding is algebraic effects, because you can do
Okay,
all
yeah.
sorts of exciting things with that. Like you can in userland model things like async await and exceptions and try catch and all that sort of stuff. Like it's clearly a really powerful thing, and I think a lot of future languages will probably have it in some degree, and it will just become normal. And that's part of why it's such a dangerous idea, because it goes, that sounds great. But actually, would that align with any of the goals of the project whatsoever? I'm trying to make a really simple language that's really approachable, and I'm going to be wedging in a very powerful tool, which is sort of experimental in a few very complicated languages. And it would completely destroy interop with, interop in the other direction with Erlang and Elixir and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's not particularly smart, I don't think.
Yeah, I can see why you want to leave it on the table, but still be hankering to revisit it at some point.
I really want it. It's just so cool.
Okay, then. So if you've left that on the table, and it does seem like a sensible choice,
Yeah.
which bits have you taken that, if I want to get started learning Gleam, what do you think are the bits I need to know?
Ooh, this is something I'm thinking about at the moment, because I'm trying to make a course for learning Gleam.
Ooh.
Yeah, so I've got some funding from the Erlang Ecosystem Foundation, which is a lovely org to try and grow the community in general, to make a syllabus on Exorcism, if you've come across that, which is a platform for practicing and learning different languages. So in February, we launched a regular track on Exorcism, which they featured, which was really lovely of them, which is basically here's a small programming challenge, solve it, and then you can get you can have a bunch of tests automatically run for you, but then also you can be mentored by a member of the community, and it's just a really fab site. Really recommend using it if you want to practice any languages. But they also have another layer on top of that, which is a syllabus, right? So as well as having challenges, they have special challenges which teach you individual concepts of a language. So if you've got a well-made syllabus, you can go from being a programmer, not you need to know a bit of programming, and you should be able to go to from zero to usable of a language by going through the course, which is really exciting.
Oh, that sounds cool.
What do you need to know? Not much, really. We try to boil it down. I'm playing on easy mode because it's such a small language, but it's mostly just functions and values and pattern matching and records and all that sort of jazz.
Okay. So, but I'm going to need to mix that into some knowledge. I mean, Erlang is very heavily actor-based.
Mm-hmm.
Is Gleam knee deep in the actor model? Do I need to learn that?
I think it's always tricky with talking about OTP, the actor framework of Erlang, because Erlang is also quite a small language. It's odd, but it's quite a small language. So when you learn Erlang, you spend this much time learning Erlang and this much time learning the actor framework, because it's it's much more than just async await or it's much more than a little concurrency module in other languages. It's in many ways much more akin to an operating system. All these independent things and ways that they talk to each other and patterns you should use so they can look after each other and deal with failure and all this sort of stuff. And it's really quite complicated. And I think if you go into beam programming through Erlang, you'll probably be spending a lot of time looking at that stuff, just because that's quite at the forefront of the of that community. However, if you learn beam programming through Elixir, they've got much more of a spin on normal sort of business programming. So making web apps and websites and this sort of jazz, and managing databases. And even though your code is all running inside this actor framework, you may never actually see. I think maybe I've obviously got no data, but I think maybe the majority of Elixir programmers don't write any OTP code at all, because they just I'm using the web server that comes with the popular web framework, and it has loads of actors under the hood, and their pub subsystems are actors, and all these other things are actors. But I just write the web handler bit that talks to a database connection that it's all actors again, and you just don't worry about it. It looks very much like if you're writing an application in, even perhaps Ruby on Rails or Python or something. because there's not even any
That's very
async await
interesting.
inside the code, because it's all just like outside of it, wrapping your handler stuff.
Right. So, because I've always had the impression that you have to get into that model to get anywhere with Erlang.
No,
But I could opt into that later once I've got my feet under the table.
yeah, and you may never get there. So the nice thing about the actor model over like async await or callbacks and futures and things like that is that if each actor only performs one piece of work, so it's entirely single threaded. You just write code that says, well, I pull the body off of the request object. There's no async. You just block the thread, and then I'm talk to the database. No async. Block the thread, and then I'm going to send the response. No async. Block the thread. It looks like it looks like it should be really inefficient, naive code that causes the whole the operating system thread to be blocked, but it doesn't, because it's like you're just blocking this one actor. You can have hundreds of thousands of them quite happily.
And people routinely do, right? It's a very normal thing in the Beam scheduler, right?
Yeah, it's super normal. Like, you should be doing that. You write the sim. So Joe Armstrong would say it's really hard to make one web server that can handle 1 million requests concurrently, but it's really easy to make one web server that can run one request and then run 1 million of them. And like, that's kind of the whole idea of like the Erlang OTP actor thing. It's like, just do the thing that's really simple for your little, whatever the smallest task is, and you multiplex it in a completely different place. And it also means when something goes wrong, you don't go, well, how do I discard that one bit of state and then not impact all the other ones? You go, well, it's just this tiny little box. Like, oof, off it goes, and everything else is okay.
This is something I love in programming, when we have a different way of looking at the same problem that gives really interesting different results.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to have to find time to play with Gleam.
Yes.
So there are two other things I really want to ask you, and maybe we should talk about keeping the lights on first.
Okay.
Because you've done a mixture of things to keep developing this, including being poor, right?
Yes. That was a good
What's
one.
it like being an independent language designer who has a cat to feed?
So traditionally, the experience has been, I work a job for a while and I get progressively more irritated with the job, not because the job's bad, although I have had some of those, but just because I wanted to be doing this other thing, and I'm spending my evenings and weekends doing it. And then somebody goes, right, I'm going to quit and I want to work full time on Gleam, and then I just watch my bank balance do this. And then at some point I go, oh, so I need, rent's this much and my bank balance is this much. I should probably get a job in the next 30 days. So I did that like, I don't know, 2 or 3 times. But then at some point, GitHub released their GitHub sponsors program, which is like, Patreon for programmers. And some people were like, you should sign up to that. And I thought, the idea that this would ever be a project that could sustain me, I just never even considered it, really, because that just making money from open source seems completely impossible as far as I can tell, unless you've got something very complicated to sell on top of it. So I signed up, and then to my surprise, a few people started sponsoring me, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. I didn't realize I had that level of support, and I just I started marketing it a little more, focusing a bit more on trying to write things that are actually just good. Like, let's write more blog posts about how Gleam works and what's going on in the Gleam world, so people can keep track of what's going on. And then it just steadily grew, and it grew to a point at which it's a lot smaller of an income than any other job I've had in a long time. However, it is actually enough to pay the bills. And I sort of go, how much money am I willing to sacrifice in order to make Gleam successful and make it exist, but also, not have a boss. Work on something I care about, and now, that's a good trade. So now I'm have less money, but can make this thing happen, which is really good. And then always looking for like little bits on the side to ways to make money. So if I can find a piece of work that aligns with Gleam, but also can bring some money to help make it a bit more sustainable, then that's worth doing. Like applying for grants and stuff. Like the Erlang, as in the Erlang ecosystem foundation one, which I mentioned earlier, for making this course to learn Gleam, like that's a good example of that sort of thing. I'd love to do more stuff like that.
Ah, cool. Can I ask? I mean, feel free to refuse to answer this question because it's about money. But the whole GitHub sponsorship thing, is it like, have you got a few large sponsors? Is it lots of little people? What are the rough numbers in there?
It's almost entirely the biggest sponsor is Fly, the deployment platform. It's really good. It's also a really good product. I don't have to say that, but it's good. You should probably use it. I use it.
Fly.io, right?
Yeah,
We'll link to that.
Yeah, I nerd out about them because they've got good developer experience, but they just do clever stuff with Firecracker VMs, and I'm just like, oh, that's really clever. I like that. So they give about maybe a third, maybe a bit more than a third, and then the rest is like people who could be giving anywhere between $1, $5, $10, and then a few people give 100, which is just amazing for people. Wow. I mean, my ideal situation would be that in the future, the companies that are using Gleam, they'll all give an amount of money that is almost insignificant to a business to not just Gleam, but their dependencies in general. I think companies should give a small amount of money to support their any open source projects they use, and then that will be much less scary for me if I've got tens of businesses giving a small amount of money rather than rely mostly on one company giving a large amount. Because the Fly guys have been fantastic, and I do hope that they continue to support. I'm extremely grateful, but there's no reason why they have to. A point may come in the future they decide that they want to do something else, and that'll be uncomfortable for me. So
yeah. So, did you ever consider? Were you ever offered? I know the inventor of Elm ended up working for a company that used Elm heavily, and he was just employed to be their in-house language developer. Is that something you'd be interested in?
I had a few organizations sort of. We didn't get very far down the process, I think, because I didn't sound very positive towards it. But I had a few people sort of gently approach that. But I'm very concerned that having a single company have such a large investment or a large perceived control in the language will really shape what kind of work that gets done. And I don't want to. Well, I mean, I do actually. If people are sponsoring and they say, "Oh, we want to be," this is a problem for us, or we want to be able to do that. I generally, shift the backlog a bit to try and align with those needs. But if it was my employer, suddenly it's not really my decision, and I'm not sort of deciding, what I think's best. I think there's actually going to be a bunch of obligation there, and then I'm not convinced that I'll be building the thing that is best for the Gleam community and future Gleam users. Because in theory, if all goes well, this project's going to go on for decades and decades and decades. Hopefully last longer continue long after I've finished working on it. So what some company needs today is not super relevant, and I'd like to separate those things out as much as possible.
So does that mean you're going for the benevolent dictator for life model?
I always joke that it's the malevolent dictator for life.
Really depends on the author, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that I think Elm Evan, the Elm chap, did some good writing on this about. I think it's a really good fit for a language at the start, or not just for language, for technical projects. Assuming you've got a good. Assuming you get lucky with the person, I guess, to some degree, and they make good decisions, it's really helpful to what can be more a cohesive decision-making process than a single person, and not squabble and not get caught in these things. And that can get you to a point when you're mature enough in order to go, okay, and now it's much less pioneering and much more stewardship. At that point, I think you can spread it out a lot more. And we're not quite there yet. I think we're pretty close.
I got the impression that Elm kind of burnt out before it got there by putting all the pressure on one person.
Yeah, it's tricky to talk about what's going on with Elm because I'm not privy to any of it, but it did seem at some point the updates just sort of stopped coming, and he's clearly a very smart guy, but I speculate it is, might be burnout, as you suggest. Like he seems to like working on things, like having quite a high degree of control over it, which everyone in that sort of situation is going to have a high degree of control. But I think delegation is so important. With Gleam, I'm very much an old open source nerd. I'm not old, but I'm very, I've been an open source nerd for a long time, and as such, like I think the community aspect of creation is super important, and so much of Gleam is from the way that we manage the issues and the way that I try and interact with the the community. It's about trying to enable people to get involved and build things, whether that be this person did this amazing piece of work that'd be really hard for me to do and it saved me loads of time, awesome. Or if it's just this person made a pull request and it wasn't very good, and we helped them get it there, and it probably took a lot more time than if I just done it myself, but they had a good time and now they're a member of the community. Like those are both wins. Those are both really good things. And so like trying to grow both of those things, and all the other interactions you can have is like super important. And I hope it means if I were to vanish tomorrow, which I'm not going to, the ball would keep going.
So have you got people like contributing tools, contributing to the language itself?
Yeah.
Making design decisions? How spread out from you is it?
The majority of the compiler development is me, like, quite a large share, but we've got the community is mostly focused around Discord at the moment, which is lovely. It's the friendliest, cheeriest bunch of people ever, and people are just there to hang out. Some people are there because they want really interested, involved in the language development and tools and all sorts of things. They're making like great libraries and things, and there's a few academic-y types who do write actually quite long form posts about different language features and how they can interact with each other, and and the references to papers and such. And then there's the people who just sort of use Gleam, and they mostly just sort of they share some libraries they've made, or like show some pet projects they've got. And there's just some people who don't use Gleam, and they're just there because they like it. Like not it as in Gleam. They like the people. Like they joined it. It's like, have you ever used Gleam? Like, oh yeah, I installed it once. I've never run it. I was like, you're here every day. But it's quite nice. Like I think it clearly shows that we're doing something right with building a community. If some people are just there because they like the community so much, like that's a good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me imagine that you're eventually going to get sponsorship to buy like 100-acre ranch. The whole Gleam community will just work the ranch.
where programmers go to retire, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Or when they're burnt out, the Louis Pilfold burnt out retirement clinic.
Gone to live on a farm, yeah, I love it.
But what is the future of Gleam? I mean, if I look at Gleam 2 years from now, will I see exciting new features? Louis Pilfold being the MC of Gleam Conf?
Maybe. I've made a tricky decision lately to like do a lot less like talking at conferences, and because I really enjoy it, but it just it takes me a long time to write a talk. I know some people can write a talk on the train on the way over, but maybe it's because I did a lot of theatre when I was younger. But it always ends up like writing a script and rehearsing the thing and like doing iterations on it, and it just takes many, many, many hours. And like I could write a blog post in much less time than this, and it'll be read by much more people. And then I can go and make a second blog post or a third, or like work on a feature and these sort of things. And, at this point in time where, people are looking at Gleam, it's got a lot of momentum, which is really exciting. Like it's got more stars on GitHub than F#, which I find bizarre.
Wow.
Like how did that happen? So like now is the time to push. So we've got to be really efficient with time, and that isn't conferences at the moment. But I'm hoping somebody will do a Gleam conf, because I'll definitely do something for that. Awesome. But in the next 2 years, like we're finally getting to the point where the language is starting to look complete. That doesn't mean nothing will be added anymore, but like all the things that I think have been, if there was a version 1 of Gleam, the language would have to have this, and this, and that's always just seemed like this mountain on the horizon. But now it looks like a hill, like it's still a very large, it's still huge, but like it's on the horizon, which is really exciting. And then there'll be decisions about, okay, does that mean we do version 1 now? What does version 1 actually mean when the binary doesn't have just the compiler and language in it, but it also has build tools and a language server and all these other things? Like, can I have some of those be like 0 point something? Or is the version 1 of the language only stability guarantees are only for the language itself and it's not for the surrounding things? So there's lots of nuances to work out. And I'd like to have a good amount of just data on how people are using it and finding it in production. Because, I feel pretty confident we've got a good design, but it may be after 2 years, people are like, actually, this thing sucks. Like, that thing there is rubbish. And I go, okay, cool, we're going to fix that. And it'd be really nice if that was like pre-1 rather than let's do 1 to 2. Because the optics, it'd be the same amount of work. The upgrade process would be the same, but it would just feel quite different to the community, I think.
So you want the major features to be ironed out in production for a while before you put the production stamp on it?
I think so. Like, I just want to have some. I just want to have like more data. More data is always good. Like, for any decision, if you're not entirely sure about something, just wait a bit. Have more shower thoughts and talk to more people and do more experiments.
Go out into the Gleam community, spawn a number of actors and see which ones crash.
Exactly, yeah. Now you're talking.
Well, I am going to go and check it out because I've got the rest of the afternoon off. Cool. Louis, that sounds absolutely great. I'm looking forward to getting my hands dirty with a language that isn't as weird as Erlang, but has the power. Thank you very much for joining me on this. I'll speak to you again soon.
Talk to you soon. And it's going to be great having you in the Gleam community.
Yes, absolutely. Good plug. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Louis. And thank you to Louis's cat, Newbie, for making a guest appearance there. With that, I think I am going to head off and kick the tyres on Gleam. I've got some spare time at the moment, so I'm going to treat myself to a bit of programming. If you want to learn more about Gleam, head to gleam.run. That's their website with all the details. And if you're anything like me, you'll probably also want to look at packages.gleam.run to see what kind of library support it's got. Before you head there, this is the part of a podcast where I tell you about our sponsor, but we don't actually have a sponsor yet. So this week's episode is sponsored by having a nice cup of tea. Whether you're listening to this podcast in the gym, the kitchen, or on the way to a trumpet lesson, why not follow it up with a nice cup of tea and perhaps a biscuit? If you want to throw a biscuit my way and support future episodes of Developer Voices, please consider clicking like and subscribe and share and all those buttons. It would be great if you share it with a friend who you think might be interested. And we all know the algorithms are trying to figure out what interests people. So if you found this interesting, tell them with a click, please. And with that, I think we're at the end of this episode. I've been your host, Chris Jenkins. This has been Developer Voices with Louis Pilfold. Thank you for listening.